All right, so Kaylee, I think I have Kaylee on to help me. And so she will be in both chat boxes to kind of help everybody. Kaylee, will you let me know if you see? I think we should be on Facebook now as well. There's a little bit of a lag time, so be patient if you send questions on Facebook because it's a little bit behind. And I'm waiting for Facebook to prepare and then we'll get started. I see Robin from Texas, kindergarten. Thank you, Robin. I'm so excited to be here. Shenandoah, instructional coach. Hello. Just saw. Okay. Hi. First grade, Title I. Looks like the downloads are good to go. Hey, everyone. Oh, hey, Virginia. That's Marianne. Mexico, kindergarten, first grade. Reading specialist, New Jersey. Welcome, welcome. All right, I am going to go ahead and we're going to get started. So tonight, this is the first part of a 4-part series. And tonight we're going to talk all about the science of reading, what it is, and we're going to talk a little bit about our reader's journey, because I think that's really important for us to know as educators. We have to kind of know the journey that our readers take to become successful readers so that when they struggle, we can fill in the gaps that we need to best support them. So we're going to do a brief overview of the science of reading, and then we're going to dive right into the route that our readers take. All right, so what is the science of reading? Many of us have heard so much about the science of reading, and I want to say one little housekeeping thing. If you send me a message, I get super distracted by the chat box. And so I'm going to kind of slide that over to the side, and I'm going to pause periodically through the slides to answer questions because I will get really distracted and I will not focus. So I'm going to let the last few people in here and then we'll go. All right. So for those of you who do not know what the science of reading is, or you want to learn a little bit more about it, the science of reading was, in 1997, the US government formed like a group of experts. And it's important to note that these experts were from all kinds of different fields. They were from relevant fields, but they weren't just educators. So they were psychologists, they were special education, they were parents. They formed this. I'm sorry, I'm letting a few more people in. I'm telling you, this is when I get distracted. And so they wanted to do this comprehensive study to figure out how we really learn how to read and why so many of our students were struggling to learn how to read. And so they wanted to do this so that we could get a deeper understanding of how our brain learns to read. And so they used all of this research, and they decided that there were 5 main pillars that were important for students as they were learning to read. And those 5 pillars were phonemic awareness, fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, and phonics. And so we're going to talk a little bit about balanced literacy because I feel like it's important. We hear that a lot. And all right, I'm going to mute this. I'm going to mute this too because I'm getting distracted. All right, so what's the big deal with balanced literacy, and why are there these reading wars? Well, there are really 2 different approaches to reading, and they have a lot in common, but when they were pitted against each other, what happened is it became a negative conversation. So where did balanced literacy come from? Well, balanced literacy actually came about around the same time the NRP came out with this report. So balanced literacy was this response to the National Reading Panel's report. And the idea was that, yes, we have vocabulary, yes, we have comprehension, yes, we have phonemic awareness, yes, we have phonics, we have all of these good things, right? And we're just going to balance them out in And that is how we will make sure that we're hitting all those components, which is true. We do need to balance all of those things. We know that our students need all of those things, but there are certain things that they need at certain times. For kindergarten, for example, they don't need to be in a level text during their small group time. They need to work on phonemic awareness. They need to work on building that letter sound knowledge and automaticity with those letter sounds. And so the really big missing piece with balanced literacy was that phonemic awareness piece. And so we know that, and we know that that was one of the biggest pieces, but we also know that phonics was also an issue in balanced literacy. It was short. It was not a big portion of the lesson, especially in kindergarten, first and second grade, and it wasn't systematic. And I don't know about you, but when I first started teaching, I was a balanced literacy teacher. I taught first grade, and I would teach what I thought was phonics. The first thing I would do would be to choose a level text. And then I would, from that level text, look through and decide, oh, you know what, AY, AI, those are patterns that I'm seeing frequently in this level text. So that's what I'm going to teach. And then alongside that, I would have a spelling list, a word study list, and my students would have to rainbow write words on Monday, and they would have to write them 3 times each on Tuesday, and they would have to sort them in their word study notebook on Wednesday. But I never really did anything with those. It was a lot of independent things that they had to do. And then we would test them on that same set of words on Friday. And so that's kind of where things went wrong as far as balanced literacy is concerned. And it was a lot of rote memorization. We thought that we just needed to teach our kids to memorize those high frequency words and to memorize those sight words. And the 3 cueing system, when we were doing level text, we would have our students, we would teach them if they got to a word that they didn't know. We weren't teaching them to decode. We were teaching them what I like to call now is coping strategies for if they were unable to sound out a word. We had all these different strategies that they could use. They could look at the picture, they could skip the word, all these different things that really weren't teaching our students to become good, strong readers. So when we think about the reading wars and we think about structured literacy, this is that umbrella term that's used to describe that those research-based programs that we teach reading. And that's kind of how we want to, when we're thinking about the difference in balanced literacy and structured literacy, we really want to deep dive into structured literacy. And that's what the science of reading really is. And so we know that we have these 5 pillars, and we know that those 5 pillars were identified as very important from the National Reading Panel's report. And that's that phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, and vocabulary and comprehension. So when we think about those pillars, how do those pillars come together to support learning to read? And I like to look at this first because I feel like the simple view of reading is kind of like that bird's eye view of what really makes good reading. So what you're looking at is basically a multiplication problem. So what you see is Gall and Tunner said that we have to have decoding and we have to have language comprehension in order to have a reading comprehension. So what does that mean? That means that our students have to know how to actually tackle those words, not come up with coping strategies to figure out words in text, but we want to make sure that we are teaching them word attack strategies so that they are able to decode. And we also want to make sure that while we're doing that, if we're a kindergarten teacher or a first grade teacher and we're teaching our students how to decode, well, we're also going to be bringing in that background knowledge, that comprehension piece, so that when they're able to actually decode the words on the page, they have that background knowledge. And so now they're able to decode and they're able to understand what they're reading. And that comes together. And that is what creates that reading comprehension. So you can't have decoding and then not have the language comprehension to be a successful reader. And you can't have that reading comprehension and not have decoding to become a successful reader. And so we have to think about this formula. And the reason I say this is a bird's eye view is because many of you have heard about Scarborough's rope. And I like to say that Scarborough's rope is kind of that zoom in lens. So we think of this as like the big picture, that simple view of reading, that's our big picture. We know that we have to have both. But then this is like our bird's eye view. And so Dr. Hollis Scarborough invented this concept of the reading rope in the early 1990s. And she used it to help parents really understand the various skills that their children needed to master and become proficient readers. And so originally she had these twisted together and made a model with pipe cleaners. And I know you've probably seen that on Pinterest. And she actually was the one that did that. And that was to demonstrate her point. And so she says you have to have the language comprehension. So you see this language comprehension here on the left. And that's that same piece that we saw with the simple view of reading. But this is when I say it's a bird's eye view, or when I say it's a zoom from that bird's eye view, because there are a lot of components to language comprehension. There's the background knowledge, there's the vocabulary, there's the language structures, that verbal reasoning, and the literacy knowledge. And so that's just one component. And then we have to look at that word recognition piece. So she calls this word recognition piece, whereas in the simple view of reading, they called it decoding. It's the same thing, and they mean the same thing when they're talking about it. And so the word recognition piece, or that decoding piece, has the phonological awareness, the decoding, and the sight recognition. And so when we think about the science of reading, there are a couple of things that we know for sure. So we know that the science of reading is evidence-based. It's based on decades of research. And this research is from all of the different fields that I talked about earlier. And they have done multiple studies to help us get to this point where they can say, this is how our brain learns to read, right? We know that our brains were not wired from birth to know how to read. And so we know that something has to happen in there so that we are able to do that. And that happens through that systematic and explicit instruction that we give our students. And so when we are thinking about the brain and we're thinking about how we learn how to read, you have to always say that there are, you have those two parts. You have your orthographic processor, you have your phonological processor, but then you also have there in the middle is where you form what I like to call the factory. And that is how we learn how to read. And that part of the brain is not there at birth, but because we learn to connect the sound to symbol, and we learn to help our students do that through systematic phonics instruction, we're forming a new part of the brain. And so that's what has to be systematic. It has to be explicit. We can't just choose a spelling pattern or a phonics pattern from a leveled text. We have to kind of bring it all together for our students, and we have to do it in a systematic and explicit way. So we know that science of reading, and I think we see this a lot, I think especially because we know how important those foundational skills are, but the science of reading is not phonics only. It's not phonemic awareness only. We learned in just the past couple of slides that there's a lot that goes into becoming a successful reader. And so it's not a strategy or an approach, and it's not comprehension only, and it's not a fad. And I think that we as educators, we always see that pendulum swing, and we always think, okay, this too shall pass. It's going to be something new, but this is research, and it's scientific research. And so it's been vetted. And so we know that it's not a fad. We know that we are learning the best way to teach our students how to become successful readers. And so it is also not guessing or memorizing words. So how does this all help us when we are in our schools and we are working with students, we're working with parents, and we're working with teachers? So one reason it's really important to understand the science of reading is because as we are choosing curriculums here in Virginia, where I am from, we are currently in the process of deciding what programs are going to be on an accepted list per the science of reading. And so if you aren't on that list, our districts can't purchase from you. And so I think it's really important as we're going through that, and as people are looking at these curriculums, we have to have the knowledge, because we have to know, okay, this is a really good program for phonics, but it really doesn't have any of that language comprehension that we need. So yes, this is an excellent phonics program, but I'm going to have to bring in something that covers that language comprehension piece so that I can make sure that my students are getting all of the components that they need. So it's important for us to understand the science of reading, the components that go into making successful readers, so that when we're choosing curriculums, we're making the best decisions for our students. And we can also use it to help determine strengths and weaknesses, which we're going to talk a little bit about of our individual students. So we know if we have students that are struggling with intervention or with reading, then we have to do some kind of intervention for them. But how do we know what intervention to do for them? Well, we know that there are two things that make a good reader, right? There is the decoding and the language comprehension. So that gives us a starting point. We know what to assess to see where those loopholes are for our students. So it's important to understand the science of reading so that we can do that. So no surprise here, I say that the science of reading takes the win for me, because as a balanced literacy teacher in the past, I have so much clarity now. I still have so much more to learn. I'm learning something new every single day, but having taught balanced literacy and having taught through this explicit, systematic way of teaching, I know what is best for my students. And so for me, the science of reading takes the cake. And so I'm going to stop there because we're going to go through the route to reading as well. But I want to see if there are any questions, because I did minimize that because I get distracted. So I'm going to go back up and answer just a few questions. I do not, in Virginia, that is not on the list. I do not think, but I will say right now we're just in phase 1. So the question was, is success for all on that list? And I know I went to the VDOE meeting last week, and I was looking kind of at that list, and they showed it quickly, and they said this is not the list, this is like the pre-list, and I don't think that I saw that on there, but I also know that we're just in those early stages. We're in phase 1, and so we will go through phase 1 and we will have that information by I think she said the end of March. So hopefully that is helpful. All right, I don't see any other questions. Kaylee, are we good over on Facebook also? All right, so this is my favorite thing to talk about, because I think this is really, really important. And I think that teachers have to understand where our students start and where they end up as far as becoming successful readers. So when we think about the path of a reader, for many children, I'm going to minimize this again. For many children, that path starts long before they're able to read. And our ultimate goal is for us to create those confident readers, but we also want we want to make sure that they're able to comprehend, because that's our end goal. We want them to not only be able to comprehend, but we want them to be able to read to learn. So we're thinking about that big picture of that is what a successful reader is able to do. But we have to start at the very beginning. So when we look at the very beginning, these are those early phonological awareness skills. And so a lot of kids will get this, a lot of students will get this, especially if they are in a print-rich environment, which is sad to say, but so many children don't come from a print-rich environment anymore. They don't have people singing nursery rhymes to them or reading picture books to them. But that is kind of where it starts. They're reading, they're listening to those rhyming books, they're hearing conversations. And so that early phonological awareness piece is that alliteration, the rhyming, syllables, and sentence segmentation. And so they're starting to kind of they're starting to hear all of these sounds and they're putting them together. And then they start to understand letter names and sounds. And so that's when they begin to kind of start to put the pieces together. So this is usually about the time that they start to notice things like their names or the names of their friends or environmental print. You know, they see the big M and they say McDonald's. And, I remember feeling like, oh, my child is brilliant because he knows he can read McDonald's. And not really, he just knew the environmental print, but they're starting to make those connections. And that is what is really, really important. So they're beginning to understand that these sounds that I hear, they have a picture or a symbol to represent them. And so that's when they kind of start to make that letter and sound connection, which is really, really important. And so they know that the letters also have sounds attached to them. And I always say, when you think about kiddos that enter kindergarten who don't have this knowledge, they really, truly are, letters really, truly are just mysterious symbols to them. They've never seen them before. They have no idea what they are. And it can be really hard for our students to learn letters and to learn sounds. And so we have to kind of keep that in mind, that I always tell people to think about, just imagine being dropped into a foreign country and being tasked with having to find your way around and not being able to read anything. And that's really how our kindergarten kiddos, that's how they feel, because they are mystery symbols to them. And so when we think about that piece, so they're starting to learn those letters, they're starting to learn some sounds, and then comes that beginning phonemic awareness piece, which is the blending and the segmenting. And so when we are thinking about our instruction, I want you to kind of go back to that conversation of the science of reading and choosing curriculums. And I want to share with you that when I often, if you've heard me speak before, you've heard me talk about being taking a sabbatical, and I really didn't take a sabbatical by choice. When COVID hit, I was plopped into a kindergarten classroom because we had really big numbers in kindergarten, and really anywhere, all K2 students. And our school district decided that K2 was going to go to school Monday through Friday. And so when they decided that, we had to also follow those CDC guidelines where our students had to be we could only have certain class sizes, and they had to be a certain number of feet away. It was crazy. And so I joke and say I took a sabbatical because I had to teach kindergarten, but that was the best thing that I ever did, because it helped me, because I had that knowledge now of the science of reading. And I was actually working with a curriculum. And when I was working with that curriculum, it's when I really started to notice that we were teaching letters and sounds, we were teaching phonemic awareness, and there was no overlay of the two. And so I was teaching my students their letter sounds. I was teaching them to blend and segment orally, but I wasn't putting it together. And that was a major problem, because we know that in order to form that part in the brain, we have to make those roadways to build that factory to connect the two. And so just tell me in the chat box if you notice this disconnect in some of the curriculums that you have used before or you are currently using. You can just say yes or no in the chat box if you also notice a disconnect there. Yeah, and so it's interesting, right? If the science tells us we have to put the two together, there are so many curriculums out there where we just don't. Yes, they do. I'm sure they do. I'm sure they notice that disconnect. So that is something that we have to be aware of. And that's why, I shared the science of reading in the background, so that we can know and we can be knowledgeable and understand, so that when we're working with programs or we're choosing programs or curriculums, that we're aware of that. And so what happens then is our students begin to, if we are doing it the right way, we're connecting the sound to the symbol, then that's when phonetic decoding starts to happen. So that's when they really start to realize, okay, I can blend and segment sounds. And if I segment those sounds and I blend them back together, I'm sounding out words, right? So that's kind of where that phonetic decoding piece starts to happen. So they take a new word, and so they hear at, they read it on the paper, and they blend it together as the word cat. Sorry, I skipped a slide. And so they're kind of putting those pieces together, right? And so I always share this quote. This is from Savannah Campbell. Campbell Creates Readers, and I love it. And I share this because I think it's so important. We have to really take a step back and consider, when we are teaching, you cannot do in print what you cannot do aloud. If you are unable to take sounds apart and put them back together, then you have no chance of doing it while reading, which is why it's so important to make sure that we have both components. They have those letter sounds, but they also have the phonemic awareness piece. And if we don't take the time to do this, and we don't take the time in kindergarten through second grade, what happens is that our students will appear to be doing fine, right? When I was teaching first grade, I would check off that my students knew that they were on a level C before they left me in first grade, and they went to second grade, and I thought to myself that I was a wonderful teacher because I had them on grade level. But what happens is that what I like to call, these are overcompensators. So in first grade, they had all of that picture support, right? They had a few sight words under their belt. They were able to figure out from context clues in the level of books that I was reading, they were able to figure out what those words were. But what happens is when they hit third grade, this sight word explosion occurs and the text becomes more complex and they don't have that picture support that they need and or that they have been relying on. And then all of a sudden they hit third grade, maybe second grade, and they start to struggle. And third grade teachers, I don't think I have any third grade teachers on here, but third grade teachers say to themselves, what are we going to do? Like, we have to push that comprehension because we have to take that into the year assessment and they have to be able to comprehend. But David Kilpatrick says that only about 80% of our students, he says we only have about 80% accuracy rate of those who are struggling, determining that they are struggling if we continue to teach by using those level of texts, because we're not really identifying those students. So that means that we miss 1 in 5 of our students if we're not providing them explicit and systematic instruction. So that's all we have to think about, those steps leading up to this point, and we have to teach that phonics. We have to do it in a systematic way because we want to give them the best chance possible when they get into that complex text to be able to read it. So just tell me in the chat box, do you feel like you have some overcompensators in your building? And I know I saw most of you guys are K2, but I'm just curious, if you are a reading specialist, do you feel like you have those overcompensators in your building? Yeah, and we think, oh, they have a comprehension deficit. They can't comprehend. And if we really dig deep and we really kind of go backwards, and I gave you guys in the handouts the that reading intervention roadblock sheet, we really do. When they're in third grade, that's when we notice it, when they're not able to comprehend that text, right? That's at the very top. And they're not able to do that. And so it's easy as teachers to continue pushing that comprehension when the reality of it is that the majority of our students who struggle have a phonological deficit, and they just have not been able to merge together and truly understand the phonetic decoding piece. Yeah. And so we just have to remember that, right? And so I put this on here because I think it's important for us to see and have a conversation about. So next, so they start that blending and segmenting. They have the phonetic decoding piece, right? They're starting to decode. And so they naturally start to be able to do things like phoneme manipulation, which is addition, deletion, and substitution. But this is what I want to talk about because this is a very, very hot topic. It's actually settled down a little bit, but Shanahan put out an article and was kind of he was professionally questioning Kilpatrick's approach to saying that students need that higher level of phoneme manipulation. He was saying, do they really need all of this time practicing oral phonemic awareness, or should they be practicing phonemic awareness in combination with phonics? And so the answer to that is yes, they need to be practicing. They need to have those phonemic awareness skills, but they also need to be doing it and applying it in print as soon as possible. And so next week, when I share all about phonics, I will share some ways that you can reach that higher level of phonemic awareness with your students, but doing it in a way that's not 10 minutes of phonemic awareness oral drills, right? I will share with you ways that you can apply it to print and make it more meaningful and make it align more for our students, because we don't want our students to be good phonemic awarenessers, right? We want them to be good readers. So phonemic awareness is just that stepping stone to helping our students become good readers. So we just have to keep that in mind, especially again, when we're choosing programs. We don't want to spend 10, 15 minutes of oral phonemic awareness with our students. We want to be applying it to print as soon as possible. So what happens then is they've got the skills, they understand their letter sounds, they're beginning to decode, and the more they read, the more they decode, the more they practice these phonics skills, the more fluent they become. So reading fluency starts to happen for our students. And what happens is they begin building automation with unfamiliar words. And this happens through a process called orthographic mapping. And so this theory was developed by Dr. Linnea Airy. And basically what it is how we store words for automatic retrieval. So you will hear sometimes, and I see it sometimes, that orthographic mapping is something that you can do. It's an activity, but it's really not an activity. It's just the process that we take to take a printed word and store it into our brain for automatic retrieval. So it's when those unfamiliar words have been mapped several times that they become automatic and we know them by sight. And so that is what orthographic mapping is. It's the process of how unfamiliar words become sight words for us. And I always share this too. And once your brain has kind of figured that out, you start to do that more quickly, right? You start to recognize things like parts of words and syllables in words, and you start to really understand that, and your brain starts to map those quickly. Once you kind of I always like to say, once your brain is in the rhythm and you're getting all the good stuff, it starts to do it quicker. And so when you are a skilled reader, I was thinking about this when I was driving to the conference last week. I was looking at road signs and I was like, I can't not read them. And it drives me crazy because you can't. When you look at something and it is a word that you have orthographically mapped, you cannot not look at it. You cannot not read it. And that will probably drive you crazy now if you think about it. So this is kind of how this is how I felt when I was driving the other day, because I was like, I can't not read it. And it just kind of drives you a little bit crazy. So the idea with fluency is that skilled readers are fast, precise, and they have automatic word recognition. And I shared with you, we start to recognize those letters, those clusters, entire words and syllables. And so we're building that automaticity. And so what happens then is once we start building that fluency, we're kind of like on that downhill slope, right? So reading fluency, we have a good rate, we have good accuracy, we have good prosody, and reading becomes effortless. And so when reading becomes effortless for us, then we begin to be able to understand what we're reading. Like the cognitive load has been lifted and we are able to sound out all of these words quickly. So now we're able to focus on what? Comprehension. We're able to really understand what it is that we are reading. And so I remember feeling like once I got to this point, I was like, yes, we have made it. We have made it. I have created some successful readers and I feel really, really good. But really our ultimate goal is that our students are reading to learn. And so then that opens up the whole new side of where we have as K2 teachers, we have been sharing, we've been reading, and kind of working on comprehension through background knowledge and through read alouds. Well, now that's when the two come together and they're able to read it and they're able to comprehend it. And now they're reading to learn. And so that's when we can kind of start to put in some of those comprehension strategies. But what I want to leave you with, and I want you to think about is I want you to imagine, I don't know how many of you or if any of you are runners, but I like to think that I'm a runner. I'm not a great runner, but I do run occasionally. And when I think about that, I was thinking the other day, when you're running and you are headed up a hill, okay? When you're at the bottom of the hill, you are confident, you feel good. You're like, I think I can do this. Okay. So you're either that person or you're at the bottom of the hill and you're looking up at it and you're like, I'm never going to be able to make it up this hill. So I want you to think about, we have two different kinds of kiddos in our classroom. We have the kiddos who come from those print-rich environments. We have those kiddos that reading comes easy to them. And so they're at the bottom of that hill getting ready to run up it, and they're excited and they feel good about themselves and they feel confident. And then we have those other kiddos who are at the bottom of the hill and they're looking up and they're thinking, that's a really steep hill. I am never going to be able to reach the top, right? But they do it anyway because they have great teachers like you who support them and who help them, And so then I want you to kind of look here at this piece right here. this beginning phonemic awareness and this phonetic decoding piece. And I want you to think about, even if you are that child at the bottom of the hill who is confident, when you get here, I don't care if you are a marathon runner, you reach this part of the hill. This is the hardest part of the hill for runners. It's right before they reach the top. It's where they're exhausted from all the climbing they've been doing. Their knees are ready to give out on them. Their legs are ready to give out on them. And they're thinking to themselves, I can't do this, right? This is really, really hard. And that's exactly how our readers feel when they reach that point, because that phonemic awareness piece at the individual level and the phonetic decoding piece is really, really hard for our students. And we have to sit in that awkward phase with them. We have to allow them to struggle through that so that they can reach the top of that hill and start to become more fluent. And sometimes it doesn't take long, and sometimes it takes a really long time for our kiddos, but we can't just, even if we have third graders, can't skip that step. We have to sit there as long as it takes for our students to become successful at decoding, because we know that they have to have that in order to make it to the bottom of the bridge and have that language comprehension piece. And so I always like to end with this image, and I want you to have this image in your head as you're working with your students, because it is hard. It is hard to sit with a first grader who has to sound out, say, 20 words, and it is sound by sound by sound. And it seems like you're never going to get to that ultimate goal, but you will if you sit in that slow and that awkward phase with them. So that is it for tonight's live. If there are any questions, I'm going to stay on and answer any questions that you have. Tomorrow, we are going to talk all about phonological awareness, phonemic awareness. I'm going to share some activities with you to kind of help get your kiddos over that hump. All thank you. Yep, sitting in some stages that are awkward, it does make the difference, doesn't it? You're welcome. Thank you, Caroline. I will send this out. I will also send out the handouts. I'm going to drop those handouts down again for you guys so that you have them if you came in late. And I hope that you will join me tomorrow. Oops, I sent a direct message. Let me send it. I hope you will join me again tomorrow, and we will talk all about, we're going to kind of start breaking these components apart. So we're going to talk about phonological awareness and phonemic awareness. Oh, thank you, Robin. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Thank you guys so much for coming. I'm going to stay on just for a minute longer if there are any questions. And if not, I hope to see you tomorrow night. Thank you. Thanks, Molly. Thanks. See you tomorrow. Same time tomorrow. Yep. And I will send the link out. I'll send it out tonight, and then I'll send it out again in the morning so you guys have it. But it's the same link for the whole live session. So if you joined on Zoom, it's the exact same link so it's tonight at 8:30 or tomorrow night 8:30, and then next Wednesday and Thursday at 8:30. But I'll send reminders. Thank you. Thank you. See you tomorrow. Thanks, guys. Yes, so you should have your step-by-step guide, but you should also have your notes and some infographics for tonight. And then tomorrow I'll have some activities to share with you. It was hard to share activities tonight just because there aren't very many when we're talking about the science of reading as our opener. So yes, Virginia, there will be more. All right. Thank you guys so much.